All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Sorry I was a few minutes late, but seems the conversations were fine, so you made do. Cool. Also, I hope you had a good ice week off. Hopefully you found some rest. Hopefully you didn't have to travel too much. If any of you, I don't know how many of you live in and around Denton, but if you made it downtown, it was literally like an ice rink for 4 days. Like all the streets were just pure ice. As all of that was developing last week, and I started thinking, it went day after day after day, and yeah, okay, we're going to cancel another one. Having you do another module felt really foolish, given you're probably balancing a whole bunch of other stuff, especially those of you who work or take care of folks or any of the above. So hopefully it wasn't too big of a deal. We just kind of shift everything over an extra week. We'll talk about the foundations of motor development, again, kind of giving some framework, right, to sort of a very complex topic. And if you had motor behavior in undergraduate before this, you probably have some knowledge of these areas. But we're going to take it a little bit further, kind of in the middle of the class today. And I can actually move this forward. Yeah. So talk about constitution motor behavior aspects that can be applied to certain disciplines depending on which aspect of motor behavior you're going to be examining. And then we're going to take a look at the articles for this week. So there were 4 of them in there. 2 of them were pretty cut and dry because they're just statements. They basically kind of give you best practices of how to do a systematic or a scoping review. So when you're reading through those, if those felt really dry and hard to read, that's why. It's basically just a manual of here's how you do all the steps. So when you ultimately have to do that as a part of this class, you can refer back to that document and go, okay, am I doing at least all the pieces I should be doing? And there's going to be some elements of each that you don't have to potentially do everything on that list, but you have to check off at least a few of them. Kind of the whole purpose of those review diagrams. Well, also the other two, hopefully, were a little more enjoyable to read. It's hard to say about an academic paper, but hopefully you found something of interest in those papers in terms of what they were trying to find, looking at the literature, and then whatever implications they came to as a result of sort of that big process. Right? 'Cause that's what you'll be replicating in this semester. Right? So really taking a look near the end of class about how they were able to come to the conclusions they ultimately did, how they went about that process. Right? So motor learning, motor control, motor behavior. Those are the three disciplines that fall under, or sorry, that should be development. That's what happens when you rush. Motor development. There we go. Ta-da. Just forget that last slide. However, these terms can tend to be used interchangeably. All right. If you had heard about how Dr. Goodwin taught this class, it was less motor behavior broadly and more motor control, motor learning. And it's more or less where he fell in. Motor development, from my understanding, was not included in that. But it is a part of the bigger picture motor behavior. And we have a separate motor development class. Right? You can take that. I think at a graduate. I don't think it's recommended. Is it required for y'all?
Not required.
Not required, but recommended. Right? They, in that class, go more into depth about that particular discipline. Right? Anybody have an idea of what separates those three? What separates control from learning from development?
Is it age?
No, not necessarily. Each sort of discipline can look just about at any age. Yeah.
Is it like the progression of a skill to the learning skill and then
That falls into what area, more specifically? That's more of a definition of what? That idea of, what's that?
development?
Yeah. So development is the idea of learning over a lifetime, right? Or learning over a long period of time. Learning, let me get my notes so I can remember exactly how it was defined. Learning and control are much more individual process. They're more individual skill element. That it also depends on what they are focused on specifically. Come on. Downloading. I want to give you the canned definition. We can go from there. So I want to. Okay. So the big difference here, motor development over longer periods of time, right? How kids go from walking, or sorry, not walking, but crawling to walking to running, right? How those skills progress, even how they progress within those skills. Motor learning and motor control focus on the very specific sort of singular tasks, right? If we think about somebody, in Dr. Goodwin's example, often using a golf swing, right? That is a very, very specific motor learning and motor control focus, right? It's that it's a closed loop skill, right? And it focuses on that one singular performance, essentially. So trying to get the most performance out of singular tasks as possible. Learning is the feedback side of it. So that would be more or less from the coaching, training, teacher side of things. When you perform a task, you give feedback, right? Depending on how that feedback is delivered, whether it's feedback that is knowledge of results or knowledge of performance. Anybody know the difference between those two?
One focuses on the process, and the other one is just the outcome.
Exactly. All right. Do you remember which one's which?
The knowledge of results is the outcome.
There you go. Yep. Not a trick question. Just follow the terms, right? Knowledge of results means that when you give feedback, you are focused on the outcome of that skill, right? That's throwing at a target, for instance. Right? On the other side, knowledge of performance is focusing on how they move, right? The process of actually doing it versus the product. So, for example, if you were training somebody to be a dart thrower, right? There are professional darts champions in the world, not just a bar sport, right? Could you use knowledge of results or knowledge of performance? Which one might you choose to help them improve? We could do both, right? Why? Which one would I use if I wanted to, for instance, if I wanted to improve their accuracy? What's that? Do you think I'd prefer to do knowledge of results or knowledge of performance? All right.
Where are they in the learning stage?
Well, let's say, that's a good point, right? Where are they? So are they a beginner or are they intermediate? Let's say they're intermediate, right? They have a good form, but now we're trying to get it more accurate, right? So we're trying to make sure they get it into the certain squares to score certain points. Right now they're a little over the board. Right? So knowledge of results or knowledge of performance? What might work better in that situation? I heard some just yell. I heard a bit of both, right? So there's a mixture out there. Why? Why might we use knowledge of results in that situation?
They already have the form down pat.
Maybe they got their form down. All right, so maybe their form is really good. So now I'm just going to focus on, let's say, hitting the same spot. All right? Yeah.
I was gonna say, maybe if we look at their results, especially specifically to the left of what they're aiming for, that's something that we can help on.
Yeah. Maybe you're noticing that when they're aiming for this target, they're getting a nice spread this way over here, right? They're kind of averaging. So you might say, hey, let's just aim like 2 inches to the left of where you normally aim, and then you'll be probably pretty close to your target. Right? How might we use knowledge of performance?
Trial or error.
Trial or error?
Yeah, this first performance is good, and the second one is bad.
Oh. So knowledge of results is giving feedback about the outcome. Knowledge of performance is giving feedback as a result of what they're doing. So what might we focus on, or how might we help focus them in order to improve their accuracy? Yeah, I don't know, I got enough there, but, right, or maybe it needs to keep their elbow in, right? Or maybe their body is off center or something. Right? Which feedback is easier to get as an athlete? Do you need a coach to really get knowledge of results? Most people can kind of get that, right? I mean, if you're aiming for a target and you're not hitting it, it becomes pretty evident. Now, coaching trainers, right, that they can help focus and guide that, right? Knowledge of results on its own is not necessarily a great indicator or a great help. Right? Knowledge of performance is a lot harder, right? How many of you have done something in your life and then did it in the mirror and then like, that is not in any way how, or watched a video of yourself doing a dance or doing a sport and you're like, I thought I looked a lot cooler than that, right? I was riding my mountain bike one time and I went off this like little drop and I thought it was really cool and then I did a video of it and I was like, it was like Napoleon Dynamite style. But it's hard as an athlete to really get good knowledge of performance. Right? You have to be really, really attuned to what you're doing or whatever it is you're practicing in order to get that type of feedback. Is it possible? Can athletes attain knowledge of performance? Absolutely. But it takes a lot of skill and a lot of focus. Right? So the other aspects that motor learning and motor control focus on is a lot of that cognitive process, right? What are the very, very minute things that go on in our body in order to produce some motor thing? Let's see if there's any other notes I had that I should tell you. Now, in terms of the general areas, we talked about that first one, right? Knowledge of results, feedback, right? Knowledge of performance. Some of the other areas also involve things like distribution of practice, right? How often does somebody need to practice a skill in order to learn it? Do you know? Every day. Maybe. How long every day? Well, right, so this is where motor behavior, the big area of motor behavior, that's a lot of what they focus on. How long does it take for somebody to learn a skill? Let's take running. How long does it take somebody to become proficient? I'm not talking Usain Bolt, right? Just proficient at running, not tripping over yourself. How long? It depends. A month? Yeah. Depends on the person. What else might it depend on?
Depends on the result you are expecting.
Right? Yeah. So
Depends on the result you are expecting. If you want to reach there by 2 minutes, to practice it, maybe certain period you might reach.
So it might be expectations,
Expectations.
right? From somebody else or something else. Well, the time, right? The time they have to do or learn it. Where they're starting from. Potentially, right? Cultural. Coach, right? Which most skills, when we learn them as kids, come from our parents. So our parents' proficiency at certain skills may transfer to us, right? There may be a reason why you throw a ball weirdly, right? From your parents, right? There might be a reason why there are some of you who, instead of learning to write right-handed or left-handed as you should have, were taught how to write right-handed. Right? How many, is anybody out there? Are you left-handed? Were you forced to write a right hand? How long did you have to write right-handed? No? Okay. I'd say maybe y'all got the better teachings because I remember tons of kids when I was going, they were forced right-handed. And then eventually they were like, my handwriting is awful. I'm just going to try doing it this way. Screw you, teacher. Yeah.
My teacher thought I was dyslexic because they would project it and I would just write it down with my left hand.
Yeah. Jaden, did you?
Oh, the school my dad went to growing up, they forced him to write with his right hand.
Yep.
One of my friends, he was forced to write.
Right-handed? Yeah. Why? Why do you think that is?
I know,
We're just inherently biased to left-handers?
I know one of my friends' dad went to a Catholic school and they forced him to do right-handed because they saw left-handed at the center.
Oh, goodness. There's
That's one.
another layer
So,
of this onion, right? The idea of secular beliefs potentially impacting movement, right? Left-handed being a sin. Okay? Although, statistically, if you're left-handed, you are far more likely to become president of the United States than right-handers. It's like, yeah, look it up. It's like half of our U.S. presidents are left-handed, especially the last 5. Right? Except the bad ones. So I'm talking, you all are in your master's level, all right? You've done an undergraduate degree. Most of you focused on kinesiology, right? As far as I know, right? Unless you're stuck in here doing something completely different. Most of you, right, have studied the idea of how we move our body, how we learn to do it, all the things, right? But yet, none of you can tell me how long it takes a person to learn a skill. Because we don't know, right? And for all of the reasons we've already mentioned and more. And so the field of motor behavior is continuing to explore that exact idea. Why might we explore that idea? What would help us understand how long or how often or how we distribute practice for learning? Efficiency? Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I've told many PE stories to most of you yet, but when I was a PE teacher, and any of you who went down a teaching path, I had a curriculum that was this big that I was supposed to provide to students in a year. Can anybody take a guess at how many times in a school year that I saw one of my elementary classes? So there's 180 days in the school year. That will start there. How many of those days did you think I'd see each class? So one of my classes. I saw them all. I saw a whole building. How many times? What's that?
What grade level?
Kindergarten through 5th grade. 30? 40? Okay. Y'all are pretty close. It was 35. 35 times to cover a curriculum. All right? Do you think that's enough time to get every one of those kids the mastery of every one of those skills? No. Some of them maybe. Some kids may already have those skills. Right? Again, maybe they have parents who encourage that type of movement. When you're teaching a classroom, take any first grade classroom, I don't care what school they're in, what part of the country are you in. You will have kids on every skill. Some are up here, a bunch who are down here, and then a whole bunch in the middle. As an educator, your goal then is to get them all at least to proficiency. So it helps to know how I might distribute practice within a situation where I see 30 kids 30 times a year to cover the entire curriculum. It's a way to break those skills down. You're a physical therapist, right? and you know you have X number of visits, you go, that is not enough. You need to be doing this twice a week outside of seeing me. Right? There's a reason that most physical therapists say you have homework to do, right? Because none of our insurances are good enough to pay to go to physical therapy as often as we need to, right? What about transfer of training? What do you think that applies to?
General abilities.
Huh. Generalizability of certain skills, right? So if I learn a skill, let's take free throw shooting, right? How do you practice free throw shooting? You stand at the line and you shoot, right? Over and over. Is that how you do it in a game? Is it exactly the same? What else happens in a game? Oh, yeah, there's distractions, right? There's a crowd yelling at you. There's players in front of you. There's the situation of the game, right? So taking something from that practice space to that game space, right? Is it a direct one-to-one transfer? No, not really. Can we change or manipulate the practice environment to more represent the game environment? Yeah, we can, right? And people study how to do that, right? That's an area where we can examine. What about retention? What does retention mean to you? Yeah, if you can remember things, right? If you can retain the information. How does that relate to motor skills? Well, if I'm learning to walk, right, am I retaining all the pieces that go into it, right? Walking is a little harder because that mostly happens as an infant. You don't really practice it. Well, you can. There are ways to do it. If anybody has seen those like trapeze things, it's really hilarious with newborns. But really, although it takes a very long time to practice with newborns, the more you do it, the more likely they are to walk more quickly, right? But why don't parents do it? Have you ever tried to walk anywhere with a toddler? Right? It takes a decade. So most times pick them up. Right?
Oh, I was gonna say, they say, like, it's just like riding a bicycle, you can do it still.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody who's not ridden a bicycle for a really long time and tried to ride a bicycle again, there's some rust you got to shake off. Right? But generally, yes. Once our body has sort of gone through those processes and sort of learned enough, right? And we're able to do it sort of over and again and recall that. If any of you have competed at a higher level of a certain sport and you maybe don't do that sport anymore, I would venture to guess you still retain a lot of the skills for that particular sport, right? You're the person who goes to open swim and you swim all the way over on the fastest side of it, right? Just simply because you're used to being able. What about individual differences? What aspects of that are important, do you think, for motor behaviorists?
There's genetic factors.
Genetic factors? Like what?
I share something.
Height.
Okay. Yeah. So height, weight, like certain things like strength, right? What's that? Flexibility, right? Again, genetics play some role in this, right? But not a whole ton of it. What other aspects might we examine in terms of individual differences? Yeah. Some genders, right? What else?
Just subjective experience.
Could be subjective experience, right? Somebody's experience of one particular practice environment versus another, or a particular type of feedback versus another, or how you might develop a certain skill versus one another, right?
Maybe like hand preference or foot preference.
could be preferences, right? Might help kind of be a little bit more objective, whether somebody's right-handed or left-handed, if they actually allow them to try it each side and go, hey, you better on that side. What else?
Mental capacity, overcoming the vulnerability.
Yeah. First, we look at cognition or metacognition. Could we look at differences across age? Could we look at disabilities versus non-disabilities? When we use certain variables, such as race or gender or disability or any of the others, what's something you have to be careful of as you interpret those results? Bias in what way? What bias meaning what? What's that? Observer bias, right? So potentially where you are situated in looking at these, how you are integrating these particular variables, right?
I was gonna say, overgeneralizing whatever you give them roles.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Being careful not to overgeneralize potential differences. I'm going to pick at race because obviously that is a very large discussion point, particularly around old, Okay, there we go. Should be back up. So there's all of you. You can see the back of your head. That's that camera back there. Stop talking heads. Yeah. Yeah, this one's a little bit different. Okay. Go away. Side thing, go away. Here we go. All right. So, back to what I was saying. Late 1800s, early 1900s is really where motor behavior kind of starts. So that's sort of the earliest place you can pin it down. That is also really sort of the years where physical education was formed. And physical education ultimately became kinesiology. Disciplines sort of spread out, they sort of specialized in certain areas, motor behavior being one of them. Back then, in the 1700s, late 1800s, we finally got to a point where, as a human population, we could study more how movement happens instead of just simply studying the body, right? Studying anatomy, right? Can anybody think of what made the ability to study movement possible around that period of time? What else was invented that allowed us to see how movement happens? What's that? The camera. Does anybody remember what the first photograph taken of they turned it into what became a short movie? And they said, it's a horse. Yeah. So it's actually a bet on whether a horse, when they are full running, if all four of their feet come off the ground. And horses move too fast for the human eye, right? So you can't just watch a horse and go, yep, that's it. Right? I win, you lose. Right? So they were able to finally take a photograph. And if you can find it on YouTube or online, it's just like a flip book GIF now they have it. It just goes back and forth, and it's just several photographs of a horse, and you see basically going from a trot to camber to a gallop, right? And eventually there's a point where there's a picture, all four legs off. Well, they did that for a bet because that's what rich white men did and still do. But then they were able, right, to take that and go, okay, now we can take photographs of other aspects, right, and examine them. And we can watch somebody move their body and see how things happen. And that was kind of sort of a natural progression. There's many diversions, often bad ones. And anyone want to take a guess at who is the leader in 1939 and 1945 in motor behavior research? It wasn't the good guys. Right, I'll say that. There was a lot of early information about motor behavior, motor learning, motor control that came from Nazi scientists, right? As well as American scientists and other major governments around the world. In the most innocuous way, why do you think we got interested in motor control during that period of time? No, not autistic kids. Didn't have anything to do with disability. What is motor control? What aspect of movement does that focus on? Does it focus more on how I'm moving my body or on my brain? What's that? Yeah. So motor control tends to go with cognition, reflexes, those aspects. So why were governments really invested in helping people with reaction, their mind control? Yeah,
Was it the race to go to the moon?
nope,
Is it fighting for?
yeah, they just want to make better soldiers, right? How can we take the average person and turn them into somebody who is a better soldier, right? Somebody who has faster reaction time, better eye-hand control, can think better under certain pressure situations, right? So motor behavior, let's learn about how those things happen. Thankfully, we moved on from there. They're also stemming from the 40s, but going on into the 60s, and you'll still read the names Glasgow, Rare, and Espenshad, but they focus more on children. Why is that such a shift, do you think? So up here, we're looking at how motor skills link with cognition, neural behavior. Here we're starting to look at how motor behavior is related to adult performance. Now we're going down to kids. What does that start to tell us? Yeah, early stages, right? Milestones, right? This is a big time. The 60s were a big time for these really segmented milestones. If any of you have seen the milestones for kids, right? That's when they were developed. It was like 1960 something. But that list, we still use it, right? From there, really, there's this memory drum theory, right? The idea that essentially, if you bang a drum enough, right, you're going to know these skills, right? Practicing them, right? That turned into this idea of what became schema theory, developmental patterns of movement, information processing theory. Big during the 70s. What else started to come about in the 70s that also used something called information processing? Computers, right? So you look at a theory like information processing, and what it is saying is that the human brain is like a computer. In order to learn skills, you have to teach the computer the skills, right? And then once they've learned them, then they hold on to them. Right? Now back then, you used to have to insert a floppy disk every time you wanted to run a program, right? So if you wanted to run, you would take your floppy disk to run, you put it in, the machine would run, and then you take it out and say, I'm going to do the next skill. Right? Obviously, that's quite slow. Right? If I were to try to connect multiple skills in a row, and we only are looking at this idea of information processing, where my brain has to select the motor skill every single time it encounters it, you're not going to do anything very quickly. Right? No matter how fast your motor control system, right, your reaction time really is. So we didn't stop at information processing. And that formulated a lot of how we think about certain skills in schema theory, the idea that schemas, right, again, a certain motor task or motor skill is considered a schema. You learn multiple schemas in different places, right? So I learned how to, most recent example, walk on carpet and then walk on ice, right? Anybody test that dynamic systems theory out over the week, right? If it was really information processing, many of you don't have that program. You don't even know how to walk on ice. This is potentially your first experience with it, right? But I'm sure most of you, right, did this, shuffled a little bit, or you just fell on the ground, which I saw a number of my neighbors do over there. We have moved in terms of looking at motor behavior sort of along this 200-year span, right? We're really not that far into this discipline. okay, of learning information. In terms of kinesiology, motor behavior, motor learning, motor development, as a field, we are nowhere near established as things like physics or chemistry that have existed for thousands of years. So it's, although yes, it is funny to stand up here and go, none of you can tell me how long it takes for somebody to learn or practice a certain skill, or how you have to distribute that, whether it's once a week or 50 minutes or 5 times a week for 20 minutes or whatever, for however many weeks long. It's not surprising when you look at it in a broader spectrum, right? That the field is really in a growing and shifting place. And for the longest time, it didn't take into account the broader aspects that may go into motor development or motor behavior or motor control or motor learning. Right? There's a very select type of folks who were doing this research, and they were doing it within very select groups of people. So some of the things that we know, quote unquote know, maybe we don't know quite as well. What was it I was, there is, I'm going to get this wrong, not, maybe diabetes, can't remember the exact piece, maybe one of you can pick it up, but essentially measuring heart rate between, it was black men and other groups. There was something that was not taken into account, essentially, in these grouping diagrams. So they would say these groups are different, but they didn't take into account a certain aspect. And again, I'm butchering this, so I don't remember exactly what it was. There's something along hypertension or one of those pieces where black men, I think you have to alter the algorithm by something. Right? But they didn't take that into account for a long period of time, and obviously there were detrimental health effects, right? As we would expect. So certain things, although in motor control and motor behavior it's not quite so life or death as cardiovascular systems, right? It still attributes to broader systems of health, well-being, control, competence, all those aspects. And so looking at what isn't or hasn't been in the literature is important in the aspects of moving forward too. Right? I think that's what I have for this. Okay. Any questions on the foundation aspect of it? Again, we're real thin, but do we understand the terms, how they differ between motor behavior, motor control, motor learning, motor development? Can we get how those all sort of fit together here?
Motor control and learning, would you say both those problems?
So they focus more on those discrete small skills. It depends what exactly they're looking at. Now I'm going to read this specifically because this comes from a book on this. So motor learning, processes such as feedback or practice improve learning and performance of a motor skill, or how response selection and execution can become more efficient and effective. So that's the sort of inside aspect. How do we control everything inside of it, right? Oh, sorry, the opposite way. Learning is exterior to our inside controls, right? And motor control is mechanisms in response selection to body's movement. So things like reaction time, eye-hand coordination, as well as environmental and individual factors affect those response selections. So does the surface I'm walking on make me go faster or slower, right? Something that Nike does all the time is shapes of shoes, right? Does the shape or rocker of the arch, or depending on where some soft bit of shoe versus some hard piece of shoe, how does that influence performance? Right? And they're looking at, marathon runners and Olympic level sprinters in terms of like how do I change the constitution of the shoe to improve running performance by half of a second? That's how far down they're going. So that's motor control. Right? They're looking at how does this specific element in the environment influence this particular outcome variable, right? And going about manipulating it now. Learning would be how that feedback, right? So how does the runner in the shoe, right, are they getting feedback from the shoe based on different parts of it, right, to help with their running stability or running speed? It's just those two back and forth. And then development is what?
Over the life.
Yeah, so it's processes, right? It's learning, going from not walking to walking. Right? That's our motor development process, right? How to walk faster or more efficiently, motor control, motor learning. Right? All of that falls under motor behavior. Right? The reason I harp on these now is because as you start investigating the literature, you may have to be very clear what aspects of this you're looking at. I don't care what you choose. Right? You could focus more on development, or you could focus more on motor control, or perhaps your particular area that you're looking at calls it motor behavior. Right? I don't care, but you have to make sure you can define it. Because when you get to the implications side of things, right, you have to have a good idea of what the differences are, right, in those particular studies. Because if they're using, this one's motor development, this one's motor control, ultimately the outcomes of those papers, even though they may be on similar topics, maybe it's baseball throwing, for instance, the implications of those papers are different. And if you just lump them together, then your implications get a little bit easier, right? Okay. So what I'd like to do is those 4 readings that we had. What I'd like you to do, get those out. If you need to stand up, stretch, go to the restroom, get a drink of water, you can do that too. Let's take 5 minutes so we can refresh ourselves. You can give them quick skims over. And then, actually, let's do 10 minutes. So let's come back at 7:40. And when we come back, let's get into the groups of 4. Okay. You don't have to move the tables if you want. You can just sort of circle around, but find those groups. Go for it.
My name is Debbie Jones. It's very nice to meet you. I am the oldest one here.
That's okay.
My grandmother, we're going on. I'm a retired dental hygienist.
Okay.
And I'm here in to stay alive. I lost my dad 4 years ago.
Okay.
To Alzheimer's, and I lost my mother a year ago. Following the COVID shot.
Yeah.
Can't predict, not gonna bring it back. Whatever. Don't have my hair. So should have been in the 90s and the 100s, they're gone. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to put myself on. So I think I understand what you're asking. So that's a terrible word, and I I'm interdisciplinary studies, gerontology, kinesiology, gerontology. So I'm trying to keep an old person alive. We have an uncle, etc. So my focus is sort of on elderly and end of life type. And I took motor development with Dr. Samuel last spring. It was fabulous. It's great course. So is that good with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just need to find something to follow your little recipe.
Yes, you might just keep going with that.
I'm having a hard time finding the right question to ask to get what I want. I'm not really sure.
We're going to get to that a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah. sounds like you're on the right track. What the thing you'll have to define is now that you've got age, so you're thinking about end of life, sort of, and geriatrics big, right?
Right, yeah.
But what is it? Can
All risk, balance,
Right. So yeah, you could go that
daily
aspect of
living,
looking
is
at
it daily living?
yeah. So and this is where it might shift where you this is where you decide whether you do a scoping or systematic, is whether say balance. If you're looking and you're doing searches and things, and if you look at it and go, okay, I have an idea. There's several papers that say, you know, balance does this, balance does that, or perhaps you're interested in the intervention of it. So how do we maintain balance? If there's not a lot of the intervention articles that you're finding, perhaps you do a scoping review to say, what interventions exist to maintain balance in elderly individuals as they move on into their older life. And so, or how, for instance, how does balance change in older populations and interventions, what interventions exist? And that would be a more scoping review because you're saying, okay, what exists here? And you might find interventions that maybe they're more product oriented, or they're just getting them to stand for a long period of time. Maybe you find a group that's process oriented, right? They're the ones that focus on like lowering, right? Yeah, maybe.
Bunch of stuff on types and old.
Yeah. So, and then again, maybe that's another aspect of it. Maybe there's sort of these holistic interventions, right? And after you gather the evidence and however many articles you find, you should say, this is what it is. You know, here's these type, there's this type, there's this type. These seem to provide more positive outcomes than this or this. But that would then give you the ability to do a systematic review of which one's more effective. Exactly. So if you find something where you're finding tons of articles on different interventions for balance, that would tell me you might want to do a systematic review because you've got enough evidence to say sort of what's going on. Now let's see which one may be better or worse. Yeah. So yeah, as long as they're using similar measures for balance, right? And you compare them to the two. So it's kind of just where they take the pieces. So whatever is jumping out at you, for instance, to go with that and see what's there. Okay, awesome. Sure.
Yes, I missed you at Starbucks today. I didn't see you there.
Oh, yeah,
But
I was over.
I did bring my iPad today, and I can AirDrop what I have,
Okay, yeah.
if that works for you.
Let's see if I've got
Oh,
it.
everybody starts popping up.
Oh, right. For 10 minutes. Alright. Should pop up there.
Oh, there you are. Dr. Andy's iPad.
That's it.
Just so it's waiting.
Thinking. Still waiting.
That's what it looks like.
I don't think I have to do anything special.
I don't think so. Wouldn't
Usually
a notification just...
typically it comes up. I did say everybody.
I wonder if it's having to load the size. Let
Oh,
me see how big this is.
that might be it.
Because I think I have the recordings of the...
Oh, it's probably huge.
That's exactly what it's doing.
It's probably downloading it all to your
Yeah, which is fine.
or your iPad.
Um,
You could put it in a zip file and then AirDrop the zip file to it.
Can I do that on an iPad?
You should be able to.
Okay.
You have, is it in a folder by itself?
Yeah, it's just a good one folder.
So if you
Oh, okay.
so that should make it easier. And you can just AirDrop the zip file. Although it's probably going to take a while to zip it.
Ooh. Share the zip. AirDrop. There you are.
Maybe?
It sure uploaded quickly. Oh, disable. Try it again. Would the university Wi-Fi make a difference?
I bet you it is. It's probably limiting it.
I hate this university Wi-Fi.
Yeah. So I learned, I don't know if will it AirDrop without? Oh yeah, because it's Bluetooth, right?
It should.
I learned that the Wi-Fi at the university is labeled as a convenience service, not an essential service. So they don't up the speeds.
That's so
UNT?
wild. Yeah.
Exactly. So they set up the internet in like the 70s and 80s when you didn't need it.
What if
We can try it a little later.
Okay.
Yeah, we can figure it out.
Okay.
I'm not excited. Huge deal. All right. Let's bring it on back to everybody. Thank you. Hopefully that was enough time. All right. So what I would like to do for the next few minutes is, with the people you're sitting with your little group, I'd like you to talk about the two differences, or not two differences, but the differences you see between these two papers. Okay? So one obviously being a systematic review, the other one being a scoping review. The population is not quite the same. Right? One is focused on broadly children and adolescents. The other one focuses on children with disabilities, but they're both looking at child populations, and they're both looking at how a certain thing is occurring within that topic area. Right? So the scoping review, they're looking at how or does mixed methods research occur, looking at physical activity for children with disabilities. And so their focus is mixed methods research, physical activity, children with disabilities. Okay. The one over here is looking at how, essentially how effective or how have certain theoretical and a-theoretical approaches been implemented. They're looking at the differences in interventions for children based on this concept of a theory-based intervention or an a-theoretical, something that doesn't have a theory. Right? And so they're looking at those differences. So I'd like you to talk with those around you about what sort of came out of each paper, right? And how there are differences, or what differences you see between these two. Okay? So why can, in the scoping paper, they say something that they couldn't come to the conclusion in a systematic review? Right. Go for it.
Julie, nice to meet you.
I saw you excited in that one.
What's that? I was cited? One of these?
This one right here.
This one? What they say? Oh, yeah. I did There's nobody else in that last thing. I'll tell you that. Actually, one other person, they're my wife. They wouldn't be cited.
I just remember thinking that the scope review, the focus was more on the articles themselves versus the systematic articles or supplementation into the project. That was the focus of there. That's what I remember thinking about this.
Yeah, I think
Good job. Yeah, still was. I did like this thing. Really good. So yeah, so this was the spirit. And then you get a third person that was like something
All right, it sounds like there's some very good conversations going on. Sounds like they're dying down a little bit, so I'm going to jump in here and reinvigorate it just a little bit. We'll go approximately 30 minutes more tonight. All right, that's my goal. So I'd like to talk about these two aspects, and then we are going to spend some time, I want you to spend some time working on your topic area. Right? Hopefully you all brought at least a paper from your particular area that we can hopefully dissect a little bit for the rest of the class. Okay? But for these, what were some big takeaways first from the scoping review? What are some things you talked about?
We talked about how it was very broad.
So what?
It was very broad.
Broad?
They discussed children, adolescents between 5 and 13 with disabilities. They kind of broke it down into 5 categories.
Mm-hmm.
The information study that the mixed method research design, ethical connection, and data integration. And they kind of picked up the issues
Mm-hmm.
within each of the 64 articles that they incorporated.
Yeah, 64. That's a lot. Right? But they left it broad intentionally, likely, to be able to capture that many. Right? So this is a good point. I'm glad you brought this up. It's going to be a tricky balance for all of you to be just specific enough that you don't have to search through thousands and thousands of articles, or being too specific and potentially missing something. Right? There's a balance that you have to sort of play with. But even though their constructs were broad, they were pretty well defined. Right? You knew what the population age they were looking at. You knew when they said mixed methods research, this is what they mean. Right? So even though they defined the construct broadly, they actually had a very specific way to define it. What else did you notice about that particular article? Yes. The inclusion and exclusion criteria? Yeah. Is that right here? Yeah, second step, search strategy. What about that?
So when I looked at the limitations, they were talking about they kind of set a standard in the beginning, but they kind of deviate from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, why would that be kind of important?
Why would it be important?
You know,
Well, so anytime well, this goes back to research methods. Anytime you undertake a particular study, right, the strength of your study rests really on following a systematic procedure. Right? If I set out to do a specific thing, and then at one point I start deviating, well, no longer am I really holding true to this particular study, or this particular aspect, right? And if I deviate for this participant, but not this one, right, then it becomes a real big issue, because then I can't compare the data, right? Even if data are collected in different settings, if I don't, different conditions, if I don't take that into context or I don't acknowledge that, it's pretty hard to compare those two pieces of data. So when they were going through here, if they shifted, and they probably had a pretty good reason to, but that's also likely why they chopped it up as a limitation. Just acknowledging, trying to be forthright, because likely some of yours might shift, right? You might, you may realize partway through that you didn't include a certain search term, or that including it this way gets you X number of sites versus this many, right? And if you switch it without acknowledging it, or say you do a database search using your 3 search terms, you get those, and then you say, oh, I'm going to change this word, and you search it in this database, you don't go back, then it becomes an issue, right? So things can a little, but typically with either type of review, you want to have a pretty well set plan going into it. What did you notice about the things that they were able to imply from this paper? What sort of stuff were they looking at? What aspects about mixed methods research did they care about?
Physical activity in children with disability and without
Mhm.
disability.
So they're looking at those aspects, but we are looking at when we look at a scoping review, because they are focused on the mixed methods research aspect of this. For them, that's the primary variable, and that's the primary construct that they're looking at. They just so happen to be looking at it within physical activity of children with disabilities. So for them, they want to understand what is going on with this mixed methods research. What are some things that might be important to look at if you are interested in the methods someone is using? What parts of the paper might you look at first? I'm interested in the methods. The method section, right? So because this scoping review focuses on that aspect of mixed methods research, you can expect that their results are going to talk about the aspects of mixed methods research. So they talk about the publication information. So where are these studies coming from? Why is it important? Why might it be important to know where studies are coming from in academic journals? Do we want to have sources that only come from one journal? No, not really. So if these 64 articles were published in 5 journals, might that be a problem? Yes, it would. But theirs were in 42 different journals. So that says, okay, this is pretty well dispersed. Likely, it's not just in, say, adapted physical activity journals. It might also be over in mixed methods specific journals. It might be in this, it might be in that. So it's sort of diverse, spread out. Why might we want to know where the countries that these are being published in? Why might that be important? What does that tell me? What does it tell me that of the 64 articles here, only 9%, 9.3%, 9.4% came from non-English speaking countries? What does that tell you?
That might be a bias.
Yeah. There may be some bias in this. Right? It may not necessarily be a bias of participants, but it could just be a bias of viewpoint. Right? America, United States, Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, we generally think the same. Generally. The Brits love to use yous when they shouldn't, but we can get over that.
Sorry.
What's that?
I do too.
You do too?
Yeah.
Better not see behavior. That's all right. I'm writing a book from a guy he's living in New Zealand, but he's from the UK, and let's just say delete and happens a lot. But Australia, United States, United Kingdom, Canada, generally we have very similar views on physical activity and disability. Even the Netherlands is a stretch. Right? That's still pretty much similar to the others. There's some differences. Turkey is quite different. But what is missing? The entire south of the globe, right, outside of Australia, which we don't count. Right? We're missing the entire continent of Africa, right? Practically all of Asia, and the huge part of the globe, right? So yeah, that's a potential issue. So as these authors, I'm sure, when they look at the results and infer from that, that may be a point where they say, you know what? We need to make sure this type of scholarship is also encouraged and amplified in these countries. Right? The other one, of course, looking at the use of mixed methods. Right? So now you've got journal publication information that can tell you a little bit about the bias. Looking at now, how did they build these together? I had most all of y'all from methods class, research methods. So, mixed methods, there's a lot of variability in there, right? Studies can look very different. And so I'm assuming that these authors were probably interested in, okay, well, how are these applied, right? Do they do more explanatory sequential? Concurrent parallel designs? Are they doing multi-phase? Are they doing embedded? What's going on? How are they weighting qualitative data versus quantitative data, etc.? And so you can obviously go down here, you can see they more or less quantified that information, right? So that's going to be similar between either side. Scoping reviews, systematic reviews tend to lean more quantitative, right? You're looking for numbers, frequencies, potential dichotomous differences, whether a hypothesis is there or not. I was talking to a group in the back. When you are going through and pulling literature for either a scoping review or a systematic review, in the scoping review, you're more interested in the process. Right? Why? What is going on here? In the systematic, you're more interested in the outcome, right? The product. What is occurring? Or can something be more efficient than something else? Very rarely, if ever, will you include qualitative data in a systematic review. simply because you can't compare it, right? And often the outcomes are so disparate, it wouldn't make sense. You could include qualitative data in a scoping review. And the reason is because you are looking at process, right? So you may be interested, and I'll use one that I've done before, but trying to define social skills in physical activity settings for autistic youth. Social skills are obviously a central tenet of autism, so it would probably be a pretty good idea if we all used the same definition across all of our different studies. And that's what my co-author and I wanted to find out. We found out that nobody uses the same definition for social skills. So when we talk about social skills interventions, that can be a real problem if we're aggregating that information together, but not using similar definitions. So in that, we didn't, but we could have used qualitative data that tried to define what social skills meant, because we could pull that construct in. But more often than not, you're going to be looking for quantitative data. And these types of subcategories, certainly the authors may have thought these up on their own, but it's likely they saw a review that somebody else did and said, hey, guess what? They looked at these 3 aspects, these 6 aspects, right? So that's justification for us doing this. But you can look at that, right? And those 6, based on those 6, does that pretty much cover the research process? Right? Your research question, your hypothesis, your purpose, your rationale for mixed methods, and theoretical. Right? That pretty much covers sort of the broad basis for why you might choose mixed methods research. So when you look at these, don't get tricked into thinking it's more complex than it needs to be, right? A lot of research really is just trying to simplify something that looks very complex, right? They simplified, I miscounted, it's 5, right? They had 5 areas that they wanted to look at. They said, these are 5 important areas for mixed methods research. Your studies even provide this information, right? And you can see 75% didn't include something like a research question, right? 90% didn't include a hypothesis. So when we're doing interventions, is it kind of a bad thing that we're not including the hypothesis? Yeah, it's kind of hard to replicate, right? So that's what this type of research is telling us, right? Telling us here are the things we need to be doing that we're not. Here they looked at, of course, then they looked at the actual design itself. And so they looked at, right, participants. I'm sorry, go back up. The design here, again, how they pulled things together, whether they're quantitative, sequential. Looks like 8 studies actually identified the design, but 33 studies, about half of them, use some variation of mixed methods terminology. What issue does that play? Why might that be important for a field to know? If I tell you I'm doing a mixed methods study and just say I'm doing some mixed methods research design or a mixed qualitative and quantitative design, what does that tell you? Nothing. It tells you you did quantitative and qualitative methods and that's about it. Right? It does not tell you anything more than that. All right. And then the last they looked at population size, how they actually included kids. So within the systematic review, how is that different? What was different in what they were looking at here compared to what they're looking at in this one? What was their frame? What's that? Well, yes, that's the first word. Yep. Yes, yeah, they were looking at motor competence versus just mixed methods research. They were looking at a very specific thing, right? They were looking at interventions. So based on motor competence interventions, just our understanding of intervention, what could we expect them to be looking into? What's going on, right? So what about these interventions might they be interested in? What is a motor competence intervention? What might somebody do in that? Do you know what motor competence is? Okay, we'll start there. What's motor competence? What's that?
Understanding how to do it.
Not just understanding how to do a skill, not just how well I can do the skill. What's competence? What's that? Your ability, your perception of your ability, right? If I'm competent that I can dunk a basketball, that's very different than me actually being able to dunk a basketball, right? Now, you can have one without the other, but it's likely that if you have high motor competence, likely your motor skill ability fairly relational. It's not a direct relationship, but in fact, this Friday, I was going to send that announcement, but I'll verbally announce, there is a panel talk about motor behavior, and it includes Dr. Johnson, who's on our faculty, as well as Dr. Stodden, who basically created the construct of motor competence, right? His paper, Stodden and colleagues, 2008, was one of the first papers to put motor competence and motor skill and show how that can relate to sort of broader health behaviors, and it's a positive spiral or a negative spiral. You may have seen this particular model because they've published on it many times since then. And I cannot remember the third person at the moment, but there's a third person on the panel, equally important to listen to. I'm just forgetting them. A lot of stuff up there. It's just gone. But it's free. It's on Zoom, so I will send out an announcement. You can register and watch it if you would like to. Okay? It's talking about motor behavior and stuff, so fits. So motor competence, the ability. So if we're looking at interventions to help somebody's motor competence, what might you think we'd be looking at? Does it relate to performance? Right. So you think they're going to have some performance outcome measures they're going to look at? Probably. Right. Are they going to have potentially skill measures or ability measures? Right? Maybe there's going to be perceptions of motor competence that we might ask kids or athletes, right, or adolescents. Right? With the atheoretical and theoretical approach, when they're adding that piece into the motor competence, what do you think well, you should know, right? But what do they do with that aspect? Yeah. So that is their focus point. So this one, right, scoping review, looking at how is mixed methods research used, okay? And here's all the different ways, right? Here's how it's been applied, here's the measures, here's the people. On this other side, they're looking at how do interventions that are driven by theory, or how do interventions not driven by theory, ultimately impact these elements of motor competence. Okay? So again, that product side of it. Okay? What were some of the things you noticed in that paper? What types of things were they able to infer? They cited me, yeah. They did. Where is it? There it is. I'm the only person that last name beyond my wife, so you see it, it's me. That was a paper that I wrote during my dissertation, okay, on dynamic systems theory and its use in autism. Right? outside of me being cited in there. Right? And I didn't mean to send you the one that had my highlights that I highlighted myself, but I promise you I don't just highlight papers with my name in them. What? So there is kind of a funny thing that if you start writing papers and you're on ResearchGate and all the other ones, they'll send you notifications when somebody cites your paper. So I'll get an email notification, I'll go in, and ooh, yeah. And then sometimes I'll read it, it's like, I didn't say that. The best one was it was in Brazilian Portuguese, so I had to get my wife to translate it. But it was in a policy paper that was in the Brazilian Portuguese government. So you never know where people are going to find your work. But what about the outcomes, the interpretations that paper 2 that they had? What were some of the things that they focused on that might have been different from the scoping paper? So looked at level of success, right? So they looked at data sources, risk of bias. There you go. So they also had study characteristics, right? So they included sort of the overall differences of the study. They had, again, publication year and publication country. They had participant demographics. So far, pretty similar to what's going on over here, right? But then you see they also have risk of bias. Right? Why might they have risk of bias over here, but not be so worried about it over here? What's that? Well, yeah, they had quite a few. They were broader. But why is bias not as big of a deal over here as it is over there? Jay?
In the scoping one, they're, again, if it doesn't think about the topic, they're just kind of generally looking about how the topic goes. In this one, since they're focused on the intervention and the outcome, they want to, and it might get used in the future, they want to make sure there's no bias without making the intervention really good.
Exactly. Yep. This one is focused on bias, pretty much exclusively, right? There's a bias with how we're framing the study. There's a bias with how we're doing this. There's a bias how we're doing that. The scoping review does sort of outline, hey, this is what's going on in this area. Here's where we might be doing good. Here's where we're missing some things. Within the systematic review, because we are focused on outcomes, we want to make sure the ones we include don't have, we're not inadvertently biasing the results. Not bias of the studies. This is a bias of our sampling. Right? Again, if you have too many studies from a particular area, or in the case of some disciplines or some topics, maybe you have a whole bunch of citations from one person or a group of people, and that's all you captured, and that's a pretty high risk of bias, right? So we want to make sure we're sort of avoiding those aspects. They also included intervention components, right? So how did these interventions differ? They included measurement. So how was motor control actually measured? And was it measured the same in the theoretical versus atheoretical papers? I did hear somebody say they've got some retention. So that's one thing we've talked about already today, right? They looked at retention. They looked at, this is all in terms of theory-based, but if there's immediate intervention effects, right? So is something happening right away when we're doing it? or is it long-term follow-up? Right? Again, because we're looking at motor behavior, we could have both. It's important to recognize that. Again, you see that's where they have the differences. So they did theory-based interventions, looking at intermediate versus retention, and then they followed that up with the atheoretical and looked at immediate versus retention. And so in their discussion, again, you see my highlighted pieces, right? How did the discussion differ from the scoping review to the systematic? Yeah.
If they were comparing the, theoretical or whatever, versus the one that they used as, theory, and then they want to see which one was better.
Mm-hmm.
They show the other one, they didn't compare it to something that they were, they wanted to see which one has better.
Yeah. So over here, they sort of situated their findings in the broader literature. Right? Here's where these particular studies had impact. On this side, we're looking at, hey, here's what they say, or what we have found different between these two different approaches. And potentially, right, they delve into how those things are different and provide rationale why we might want to use one over the other, right? I like this one, hence why I highlighted it. And I wish I had this when I did my dissertation, because I had the same argument with one of my mentors on this exact same point. But it said findings may indicate that theoretical basis for motor control or motor competence intervention is not important, but rather the volume of the additional physical activity. What does that sentence tell you?
How much they continue to use the intervention, and like.
Yeah. What did I talk about at the very beginning of class that I harped on? The fact that none of you could tell me how long it takes distribution of practice. This sentence right here is a pretty strong argument for the fact that you don't need a theoretical basis to do a motor competence intervention. You just simply need to give kids a whole lot of physical activity. Let kids move, they're more competent. How about that? Right? They came to that conclusion, right? Because there really was no difference in their minds, between the atheoretical and the theoretical papers. So their argument is saying, hey, we just need to give the kids physical activity. Yeah, theory is important, but maybe we don't have to be so strict to it. All right, and on that, and I know I said 8:30, what I would like you to do, don't you love it when they have the dance parties here at night? Okay, that's a very interesting dance. Here's, before I let y'all go, because I said 8:30, I'm going to keep to it. I have a slide up here that I want you to respond, and I know you haven't given it a lot of thought yet, but what we'll do next Monday is we'll spend a little bit more time taking these constructs and applying them to our topics. So hopefully today, now that we've kind of formed a little bit more the idea of what all the areas of motor behavior are for you, and looked at how those can be applied in a systematic or a scoping review, hopefully gives you a little bit more of a frame for your particular topic. I suggest in this upcoming week, do some searches in Google Scholar or through the library. There is a free service called Research Rabbit that if you, for instance, find a paper that you feel really ties into your particular topic, you can drop the DOI number. Does everybody know what the DOI number is? Okay. That says DOI. Most all papers have it, usually it's a bunch of numbers. You drop that number into Research Rabbit, it will give you a network of papers that are somehow affiliated with that one, whether it be by topic, by citation, by the papers that paper cited and connect. So it can be quite overwhelming because it's a big spider web of a whole bunch of papers, but it might help you kind of navigate down some rabbit holes a little bit easier and see like, oh, this is where this topic goes, or don't spend too much time, but that might help you as you're trying to frame some of this. What you'll need, and hopefully you've noticed from the two examples that we talked about today, is you need more than just a population, you need more than just a specific construct, depending on whatever you're trying to look at. Right? So, for instance, I'm going to use your example because it's one in my mind. But if you were to say, look at balance in older populations, say 70 and plus, 70 and older, and you want to know, does balance maintain? Or maybe you want to know, what are some interventions to help improve balance in later life? So your focus goal would be that older age, balance, and interventions, right? Whether it be physical activity, you might do some searches with just older populations, balance, and intervention and see what comes up. So maybe some specific types of interventions or specific frameworks. So you might play around with your topics at this point, kind of toy around with the different words that you put in, the keywords, stuff like that. Next week, when we come back in, we'll spend a little more time in class doing that. Kind of wanted to catch us up in terms of missing last week. Because your preliminary search protocol will be due next Wednesday. So that's, we'll walk through kind of the pieces of it. But it's essentially like your process. You're telling me, here are the steps, right? Here's the topic, here's the constructs, here are my search terms, here's the databases I'm planning on searching, etc. Right? So it's just kind of your plan set out ahead. Right? With that, go ahead. What I'd like you to do is just 3 questions. So it doesn't have to be super long, but just tell me at this point, what constructs, no, I drift, so if I'm in your way, tell me to get out of the way. What constructs, right? So is it older populations? Is it children? Children from what age, right? If you've gotten that far. Is it youth? Is it adults? Is it athletes? Is it, right? So tell me, are you looking at balance or reaction time or fundamental skill development or, right? So tell me kind of what are the things you're sort of framing this about. Search terms. So for instance, if you're interested in physical activity interventions, the search terms for that would be everything that you think is essentially a synonym for physical activity. Sport, exercise, physical fitness. Right? What are the things, because what you're trying to do is essentially guess at how people are defining the same term you are and trying to capture all of that. Right? So if, again, going back to the example of the older populations, you might include elderly, geriatric, ancient. No, I'm just kidding. And then the last question is databases. I know at least those of you who had research methods with me last semester know of all the databases that the university has access to. If you don't, we can also do just a quick kind of delve into it next week or a refresher for some of those, because I know Joe, our librarian, went over it very quickly. But when you do a scoping review or a systematic review, Google Scholar isn't a good database. You wouldn't use that one. You would, because it's too good, right? It captures too many things. So you end up cycling or having to sift through a whole bunch of evidence you don't need to. Databases are more like PubMed is a big one, Abisco Host, Sport Discus, ResearchGate would not be it, because again, that one's user generated. ResearchGate and Google Scholar can be good to find PDFs if you need them. If you don't know anything about the databases, if you go to the university library's website, you know where there's just like that general search, you can just type anything in there. There's a tab that will take you to the database searches, and it'll show you just a list, and there's probably well over 100 on the list. Right? You're not going to use all of them, but I'm going to go back to this real quick. No, they didn't do it. Oh, I think I may have closed it. Let's see if I have it here. There you go. So for instance, this particular, they covered just about all of them. So they did 7 databases: PubMed, Medline, Sport Discus, Chenal, Scopus, Web of Science, and Base. Okay. So those were the 7 that they used. Those are the big ones. Right? Most of you, probably all of you, will use PubMed and Sport Discus and Scopus and Web of Science. Those are kind of the big ones. Don't worry, I'll go over this again and again. But there are sometimes more specific journals based on certain disciplines. So for instance, if you were doing a scoping review or systematic review on elderly populations, well, there's a database that includes all journals just focused on elderly populations. So you probably want to include that one, right? And what you'll find, right, is you will find a lot of overlap, as hopefully you should, between different databases. Right? Stuff that is in Sport Discus, a good portion of it will be in PubMed. Right? But the reason you go to a bunch of different databases, you don't have to do every single one, it can get a little unwieldy, but you want to cover enough of your bases just so that you can be confident to say, I searched just about as well as I could. Right? As you notice, there's differing numbers of studies you'll get. That scoping review, they had 64. The other one, I think theirs was closer to the teens, right? I did a review one time and had 5 studies at the end of it, right? Just simply because of the parameters that we used. We went from 2,000 to 5, right? So depending on how you go about looking at it can shift how many are actually included. But you want to be able to say, I did my due diligence, and these are what I came up with. Okay? Yeah. So if you don't know those databases offhand, if you're not sure at this point, you can write, I don't know. If you're still thinking about certain topics, it's okay. Just have kind of big ideas at this point. I'm just trying to capture where you're at. So once you've responded, you're free to go. I will see you next Monday. The next module will be open for you by tomorrow afternoon. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the one thing you might need to find is the and then what aspects fine motor skills. They can draw, certain fine motor skills. What kind of play? So is it free play, structured play? Recess, is it social play? There's different types of play. Well, yeah. So kind of think about what aspects of things. It's just defining what things are.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you think you probably have to, you might do a little trial and error, right? You might have to kind of plug in different search terms and see what articles come up. And think about maybe instead of being so specific of like feeding to, adaptive. So that's kind of where that fits in, and I guess so it might be looking at the literature to see how physical activity relates to executive function.
Yeah, I have decided, I know that I want to do before we start walking.
Okay, so with Down syndrome, walking is often delayed to 3 years of age, so that might be a rationale for why you look at that population. So, for instance,
I'm typing everything.
no, that's okay. So if for instance, you'd have to find the literature, I don't know exactly, but
I found
it's something around 18 to 2 years, somewhere there.
And I found an article saying that why they have like delay or like strength, like business strength, and it's because of the things that smaller people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So maybe I can use some of that. Okay.
Yeah. So that can be rationale to say why you might look at a certain group.
Okay.
So you're interested in this idea of motor skills and executive function.
Yes.
And you want to know how that starts, and you want to look at young kids and potentially how this might be done using an article that says kids with Down syndrome walk between the ages of 18 months and 2 years of age. Therefore, I'm going to include a population up to 3 years of age in my review. That would justify why.
I was going to say that to justify why I'm making it like a little bit more.
Well, yeah, so when I would do one on fundamental motor skills, those develop between 5 and 12. So that's the justification. So when I say when I'm doing a review looking at fundamental motor skills of children, because it's fundamental, and so 5 to 12 is when they learn that. That's the age range. So that's the justification.
Okay.
So that's how you do
Thank
that.
you. I'm going to say like
Perfect. There's a
Couple questions.
Yeah.
For constructs, is that kind of
topics, ideas. So, construct of that scoping review, that would be mixed methods research. Construct of systematic review was motor skills. So, what are those things you're looking for? And it's okay if they're not super defined at this point, but just trying to play into where to start, because those are really going to transition into those search terms that are being used, and that can also impact types of data sets as well.
And then just looking at the difference between systematic and scoping review, I'm still not, I do understand the difference because it looks like with scoping review, it's very data focused, especially like maybe just.
It's kind of the other way.
Oh, okay.
So scoping review tends to be, I want to know what the process is. I want to know what's going on. You're in a way providing a map for the next person. Right? You're saying, based on these constructs, way I've defined them, this is what's the trend, right? So in that first one, when they were looking at mixed methods of search, they weren't necessarily looking at what the outcomes of those articles were. They wanted to know what were the steps that they were doing within mixed methods. What was the population they were using? What types of data were they collecting? How did they look at that? In systematic review, you're more focused on the outcomes of the paper. So you would look at, say, paper one and paper two, and paper one is, in this instance, a theoretical intervention, theoretical based. This one is a theoretical. What are the differences? This one, they ultimately say there's not really any, but they look at the outcomes, what types of measures they were looking at in terms of motor competence, and which one improved, which is good. So it's really a matter of, if you're looking at the literature of your topics ultimately, and you are seeing intervention, likely you probably do a systematic review. Because the idea is that the field has defined the constructs enough that people are doing interventions. Scoping reviews are more for if topics are still a little uncertain, or maybe there might be a few interventions, but nobody's yet put them together.
Right, and that's helpful. And this will probably be because we're gonna do one of these reviews, so this is probably the first time I've ever.
That's okay. I think it's the first time you just let all of them.
Okay, so, all right, this is one person message I didn't know.
All right.
Because I know you have a different class.
Yeah, they did a research proposal.
Okay.
So they did a little literature review, so this is a much bigger process.
Okay.
So yeah, you're not any different.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. You too.
Okay, so I found this article that is generally what my topic
Okay.
is going to be. So I put that on.
Mhm.
I'm trying to look on a slide of my life. Okay.
Yeah.
I go through routines and they'll do super well in practice, then all of a sudden tournament comes, anxiety, nerves hit, and all of a sudden can't get your body moving.
Mm-hmm.
But
Oh,
will I
yeah.
need to be more specific than that, or is that generally where you want to be in this unit?
I think you're on the right path, the right track. So I think you're getting there. It just might be, I guess, problematizing what it is you're looking. So, kind of like this. So motor skills, perceived social support. So
Like anxiety is too vague.
yeah. So yeah. I mean, if you were to include anxiety, perhaps you could do a scoping review in which you would say, how is anxiety explored in relation to motor skills and say how is it 14 goals, right? You might also look at how does social support impact perceived anxiety or performance anxiety or something. It might just be sort of defining what the relationship is you're looking at and kind of figure out.
The first thing you said is closer to what I'm looking for.
Okay.
But do I need to be sport specific, or can I keep it as just?
Well, that depends on the literature, right? So, I would say to start, don't be sports specific. Just
Okay.
start broadly. If you find out, come back with 60 articles, and you say, okay, well, maybe I want to refine this, a little bit more. But I say, maybe in your initial search you have like 7,000 articles. And you say, okay, I'm gonna pull this and see if volleyball, or see if team sports, or individual, see if there's something that might narrow this down if it's important. The other aspect that you can do is include that as a variable that you look at. And so instead of,
Like definitely leaning towards team sports.
Yeah.
I'm assuming individual is going to bring you to a whole new.
you could, right?
Like, yeah.
But there's also stuff that we've learned in individual sports that we can't learn in team sport that could be applied, right?
If I was then comparing it, so would I go
So
to systematic?
Well, that's if you were comparing individual versus team sport.
Okay.
But if you were just saying, looking at how social support influences anxiety within these different settings, then you could do a scope and review and say, in team settings, this is what we're seeing and how we're examining anxiety. In individual settings, this is how we're examining anxiety. If you then wanted to compare them, then you have to do a systematic step up. Does that make sense?
I don't know.
I think
But
it's
this is where it's
I
the
think
general base.
Start there and figure out which of the constructs is the priority. Right? So is it the social support? Is it the team setting? Is it the anxiety? Which ones sort of sit at the forefront? And then which ones are you thinking are more mediators? Okay. So,
It's not good.
yeah, this was way too much.
I really want to see that.
Yeah.
Freshman and sophomore.
Did you have,
Okay.
let me turn, yeah, did you need?
No, anxiety is where I'm going with it, but I was so